The person telling. Okay, so teacher credibility. The first thing I'd like to do is ask you, why did you attend this session? I realize some of you just attended all of them, but why particularly, especially those who maybe this is your first and only session, why did you choose this session? What are you hoping to hear? You know, are you hoping to get any specific takeaways? Why teacher credibility and collective teacher efficacy?
Are you looking for an answer from us or?
Yes, please. I'm sorry.
Okay.
I should have said that. I want you guys to share. I want this session to be very interactive. So jump in anytime.
My name's Carly. I'm a teacher at Baden. And I'm entering my first, well, now it'll be my second year officially as a high school teacher. And I'm 38. So it was, later in life transition to something that I've always thought about. And especially as a high school teacher, I want my students to see me as credible, because I feel like that, just in my first year of teaching, I've noticed that when I would talk to them about, things that I had experienced in my life that related to what I was teaching, I really could grab their attention a lot more effectively. So, rather than just being able to pull from real life, I just want to be more credible in general, so that honestly, so my students take me more seriously, and I can be as effective in what I teach and how I influence them as much as possible. So as soon as I saw this subject, I knew this was the one I wanted to do.
Great. Thank you for sharing. And you're definitely right, Carly, that if students don't see their teachers as credible, it really does decrease the motivation to learn. Definitely.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing.
I think for kids, younger kids, they pretty much, it's a given to them. They assume that their teachers know, what they're talking about and probably have the right answers and things like that. But I feel like our parents have changed, and anybody will tell you who's been in the profession for any length of time. Parents used to be more supportive of their schools, of their teachers, of their administration, of their school community. If their child was in trouble at school, they got in trouble at home, and so forth. And I'd like, those continued hints, or what does it take? I think parents today are harder to read, and you don't know what they want. It's ever changing depending upon social media. What's the flavor of the week for their school? So looking for some consistency in what all parents expect for teachers to be credible. And, so that's what I'm looking for. What's out there? What do we need to be going for? What are the goals for that?
Great. Thanks, Susan.
Hi, I'm Karen Buddy, and I wanted to share a lot like Carly did that as a middle school language arts teacher at St. Margaret of York, I think a lot of my rapport with students really is important. Like that's the key to helping them be successful in my class as a language arts teacher, writer, reflecting, just helping them grow as a person. So if there's not that connection with the students, I don't think the class is going to be meaningful to them. So it's important at all levels of teaching, but especially in middle school and high school, you really need to be a genuine teacher and somehow find ways that you're more like the students than you are different, and find that common ground to work from. But I think it's true of all content areas, but especially I really feel like students hold back in writing and sometimes in discussion if they're not comfortable where they are and with their classmates.
Yes, this is definitely integral, I would think, in a language arts environment to help build that trust and to help them to feel safe and secure, to take that risk to share.
Exactly.
Right. And yes, definitely. Thank you for sharing that.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead, Robert.
I think that, especially I teach grade school music, K to 8. The upper kids look to see that I'm proficient at my instrument, that I'm proficient in my knowledge of music. But I see a real relationship with our workshop last week in that classroom management, that the kids feel safe in the room, that they can speak their opinion when it's appropriate, and that they get along and that they know the expectations. I see a relationship between these two meetings.
Definitely, definitely. That's a good point, Robert, because if we don't have that classroom management set up, those procedures, so the students don't feel comfortable and safe, then you're right. Teacher credibility, it doesn't really matter. You're absolutely correct. Thanks for pointing that out. Anyone else? Okay, well, let's jump into this now. I do want to encourage you, please, to speak up at any time. I want this to be interactive. I don't want this to be me just talking for 3 hours. I know you don't want to hear that. I don't want to do that. So please feel free to share. Even if you're a newer teacher, I feel like sometimes our newer teachers don't feel like, you know, they should be sharing, but you guys have so much experience that you have gleaned from your observations. I know that, you know, whatever they're teaching in college is a lot different than maybe what us older folks had. So I would love to even hear from the newer teachers too. So please, everyone, I hope that you feel comfortable to share. And if you feel more comfortable chatting, feel free to put things in the chat box. That's quite okay too. So okay, I'm going to go ahead and start to share my screen. And of course, my PowerPoint is not at the beginning. That's okay. Okay, can everybody see that? Okay, great. Okay, so as I said, we're talking about teacher credibility and collective teacher efficacy. There's a lot of terms in this presentation, but I just want to make sure that we're all kind of on the same page as far as definitions, and you'll see what I mean in a minute. But if you are interested at the end of this session, if you really liked a lot of these ideas, you might really want to consider buying this teacher credibility and collective teacher efficacy playbook. It's pretty thick. Here, wait a minute, let me put these. My pictures are kind of off to the side, so if I can, okay, now I can see. It's pretty thick, as you can see, but it's a great fun read. And I know that sounds weird, but what I really like about it is they have these little things. If you can see this, they'll have a little QR code, like with some of the topics, and you just literally take your phone, and it's just a short little video of either Doug Fisher, Nancy Fry, or Dominique Smith kind of talking about that topic, which, I don't know, I just think that's really cool, you know, with technology nowadays. But you'll find that if, you know, there's a lot of resources you can use. There's some different little activities you can do with team members. So I just encourage you that if you find today to be, you know, interesting, you might want to consider buying that playbook. And this is all part of the whole visible learning framework that John Hattie has put out. I'm sure many of you have heard about John Hattie, and we'll talk about him more today. But this is all part of his visible learning framework. And it's what we're going to be focusing on next year for the whole Archdiocese, is that whole idea of teacher clarity. So the principals are going to be attending those meetings and then hopefully taking that back to their schools and implementing some of those concepts, teacher clarity. So more to come, but okay. So teacher credibility, just to make sure that we're all on the same page as far as definition of teacher credibility, it's a student's belief that they can learn from a particular teacher because the adult is believable, convincing, and capable of persuading students that they can be successful. And we're going to talk about all these different components of teacher credibility. But as many of you said when we were talking earlier, you know, you want to be a credible teacher so that your students will learn from you and want to learn from you. And that is so true. You know, they need to see us as believable and convincing and competent. So we'll get into all that. So I just mentioned John Hattie a little bit ago. He has a book and it talks about the meta-analyses, and he takes all of these different learning and teaching activities and he gives it an effect size. And the average impact for a full year of growth is 0.4. So that's just a normal growth. But the effect size of teacher credibility is 1.09, which is huge, absolutely huge. So that's why I'm so glad to see many of you here at this session, because this is such an important part of your teaching, or at least it should be.
Yes.
I'm going to ask everybody to mute their microphones except when you're talking. We're hearing someone talking out there, so if everyone doesn't mind muting.
Promise to stay in.
Yep, turn it up on your phone.
Okay, let me mute her. Okay, she's muted. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, collective teacher efficacy. And again, you probably know what this means already, but I just kind of want to make sure we're all on the same page. So it's a staff's shared belief that through their collective action, them working together, they can positively influence student outcomes for all students. And there's a reason that all is capitalized, is because we need to make sure that we are influencing all students. So this is just the ability of the staff to work together. You know, it's kind of like a PLC, but more on a staff level PLC, where we're working together to educate our students. Any questions about definitions of either one of those terms? Pretty easy. I'm sure you. And collective teacher efficacy, believe it or not, has the highest of all John Hattie's effect sizes, and that's 1.39. So it's really important that hopefully your staff's working together. And I realize as a teacher, this is hard for you to do. It really needs to come from the principal. But I think you can at least start with maybe your PLC or your grade level teams, or maybe even your grade level bands, to kind of start to promote this idea of collective teacher efficacy. And then maybe by your modeling, it would influence the other teachers. But like I said, I'm glad we have some principals on here today also. Okay, so teacher credibility. There are 4 components of teacher credibility, and we're going to talk about all 4 of these, okay? Trust, competence, dynamism, and immediacy. Before we get into that though, I'm going to give you a little few-minute exercise. I'm going to ask you to take and write those 4 words down on, if hopefully you have a piece of paper just sitting around, scrap paper, whatever. And I'd like you to just write some words that come to mind when you hear those different terms. So trust. What words come to your mind when you think of trust? And then the same for competence, dynamism, and immediacy. I'm going to give you, let's start with 3 minutes and see what that feels like. Just jot down some terms that come to mind. Oh, and if you haven't done this, please write your name, type your name and the school that you're from in the chat, please. That's how we're going to take attendance for the 0.3 free CEUs. Maybe one more minute. Okay, let's start looking at these. So let's talk about trust. I'm going to switch back. I'm going to stop my share and switch back to full gallery view. If you don't mind being on camera, if you don't mind coming on camera when we have our little discussions, that'd be great, but that's okay if your camera's not working, or, you know, I just understand that. So let's just throw out some terms. Trust. When you hear the word trust, what do you think of?
Empathy or understanding.
Great.
I always think of different relationships you can build.
Okay.
I wrote down faith and belief.
Okay, Karen, I think said faith and belief.
I said fair and honest.
Fair and honest. I didn't hear that one.
Confidentiality.
Confidentiality.
Consistency and dependability.
Great.
Willing to take risks.
Great.
Safe.
Faith. Definitely.
Understanding.
Understanding. Okay, what about competence?
Knowledge.
Robert, go ahead. What'd you say?
Knowledge.
Knowledge. And what did that other person say?
I said confidence.
Confidence. Thanks, Erica.
Proficiency.
Proficiency.
Skilled.
Capable.
Great words. I saw someone hit on chat experience. Belief, buy-in. Okay, what about dynamism?
Enthusiasm.
Excitement.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, joy.
Excitement,
Passion.
joy.
Passion.
Passion.
Captivating.
That's a good one. Captivating.
Fun.
High energy.
Loving your job, being enthusiastic.
Great. Hopefully we all love our jobs. What about immediacy?
Now.
Mhm.
Now.
Yes, definitely.
It almost seems like urgent to me. Urgent.
Efficient.
Great.
Encouraging.
Definitely. Relevance. What I'm teaching is applicable and relevant. Definitely. Saliency. Another great one. Okay, that's great. I wanted you to kind of start to get the wheels turning in there, start thinking about what these terms mean. So I'm going to go back and share my screen here. Okay. Well, and of course, it won't let me advance because I didn't escape. And sorry. Sometimes technology is just drives you crazy. I have to go back to my PowerPoint and escape it so that it's back to the. Okay, now let me share again. Okay, slideshow, current slide. Okay, can everybody see the trust screen? Great. Okay, so first we're going to talk about trust, and you guys had some great terms when you were thinking about trust. So trust, and you know, I do want to stop and say one thing. A lot of times, you know, when we're talking about some of these concepts, I might flip back and forth between you with your students and you with your fellow staff members. So, because I do feel like teacher credibility, we need to be credible with our students and with our peers. So I just kind of wanted to point that out. But students know that their teacher really cares about them as individuals, and they have their best academic and social interests at heart. Teachers are true to their word and are reliable. And a lot of the terms you guys said really hit home with what this means. So there's 5 elements of trust: benevolence, honesty, openness, reliability, and competency, which we did say quite a few of these. So benevolence is just the idea that the student knows that you really do care about them, you're going to protect them, you're not going to take advantage of them, they feel safe. Honesty, obviously, you know what honesty is. You know that someone is true to their word. And again, this is a great thing to think about too, is that, you know, they accept the response. Oops, I skipped that too far and I clicked. Sorry about that. They accept the responsibility for your own actions. You don't distort the truth in any way to shift the blame to someone else. You're honest. You tell the truth, tell it like it is. Openness, and there's different kinds of openness here, but openness that you are open to them about sharing information. Now, I obviously don't mean that you're going to share about every little aspect of your life, but just that you're willing to open up somewhat and kind of let them in and help them to get to know you. And even vulnerability kind of comes into play here, because you need to show them vulnerability. But this whole idea of openness really helps to build that trust. Obviously, reliability, I think we said this, it's that consistency. They know, like, you know, just going to classroom management, they know what the procedures are. They know that you're going to be consistent with behavior, and they feel comfortable with that. There's this sense that, you know, their needs are going to be met, they're safe and secure. And then obviously competency, I think Bob was talking about this with the music, that obviously the students are going to look to him and see, does he know how to play this instrument or do this or that? So it's that competency, the ability to perform. And not only the ability to perform, but your ability to teach and how you teach. And we'll get into all this when we start talking about that. So I'm just going to ask you to take a minute or two, and I'm not going to ask you to share this, but just when you think of those 5 elements, and I can go and put that slide back up, those 5 elements of trust, what do you see as your strengths? Maybe we will share, actually, we will share. What do you see as your strengths, and what areas might need a little attention? Take a minute or two to think about that. All right. Okay. Okay, does anyone want to share what you see as your strength? It's okay, we all have strengths, so it's great to realize your strengths.
I'll go ahead. I'd say openness. In my past life, I was an engineer, and I've got a bunch of other life experiences. I am completely open to relating those to the subject material if it can give them another way to get at a level of understanding.
That's great. Anyone else?
Well, I'm much more willing to talk about my strengths than the areas that need my attention.
There you go.
I don't know if I'm ready to put that out on the web, but I think my strength is the knowledge of my subject.
Great. I'm not going to ask you areas that need attention, so don't worry. What else are some strengths out there?
Well, it might not seem like it at this early morning in the summer when I'm laid back, but I tend to be pretty dynamic. I think I'm high energy when I teach. You could, and as a result, it sometimes buzzes up the kids who were sitting quietly a minute ago, but I am good at exciting people.
That's great. Knowing you, Susan, I totally believe that. Okay, maybe one more. Who's a brave soul out there? See, I'm being comfortable with that wait time. But I don't think that my wait time is going to get one more to share. So that's okay. Okay, let's keep going here. Okay, so I just want to, as I said in the book, they give you some instruments that you can use. So there is an instrument in the book, and it's called a measurement of trust for students. So if you, you would need to be brave for this. You need some courage, but there is an instrument where students just answer questions about you. And well, actually, this one is more teachers in general in the whole school. And it just kind of measures their perceptions on where is this trust in the school. So just to give you some ideas, you know, teachers are always ready to help. Teachers are easy to talk to at this school. Students learn a lot from teachers in this school. Students at the school can depend on teachers. Teachers at the school do a terrific job, and you get the idea. But there's quite a few, and you can score it, and you can kind of get an idea. Like, you literally could do this with your individual students and ask them just to consider you. Or, you know, you can do it grade level, grade band, the whole school. And it kind of explains then how to score it. So this is in the book if it's something that you would be interested in. And then this was a copy of it, but it didn't turn out well at all. So I tried to take a picture but it didn't quite work. So, and that's the scoring that you can use. It's not a long instrument at all. It's only 10 questions. And you could always add to it also if you wanted to. Okay, there's also this measure of faculty trust in schools, and this would be you with your peers, you with your school leader, and you with your students. This is a little bit more involved, but again, it's just an instrument that you can use if you would like to. So just be aware that that is in there. Okay, so let's talk about when trust is broken. What are some things you can do? And you might want to think of something specific, you with a student, you with a parent, you with another teacher, or even just another situation you've observed. But it might be good to kind of have that in mind as we're going through this. So obviously you want to observe and acknowledge what has happened. You really need to reflect on, what happened, what caused that trust to be broken. And you really need to consider feelings when you're reflecting. Think about how you feel, think about how the other person might feel. And then just realize that, both sides need support. So, if it's you and a student, obviously you want to feel better, but we want to make sure that that student feels better too and gets some sort of support. And then after it happens and you try to work on this trust and try to rebuild this trust, think about, what did you learn from this, from this particular experience? Maybe it was, like I said, you with a student or you with a faculty member. What did you learn from that? And take responsibility for your actions. If you did do something wrong, admit to that. I got to tell you, it's interesting being a principal. And, as a principal, my number one priority was protecting and supporting my teachers. Many, many times they didn't even realize, conversations I would have with parents, just all of the things that you do to support your teachers. But sometimes teachers maybe just don't quite do the right thing. And obviously I still support them 100% to the parent, but sometimes, I have to sit down with that teacher and say, hey, maybe you just didn't maybe you didn't handle this quite right. And I have before said to teachers, you might really want to consider apologizing. And I know that teachers are reluctant to apologize. Some are, some aren't. Some are, but I think that if you have done something wrong and you know that you've done something wrong, I think starting the conversation with taking responsibility for your actions and apologizing for that, it does so much to diffuse the entire conversation and situation. So I have encouraged a teacher a time or two to, explain, maybe what they did wrong and to apologize. And many times I'm there with them, like, if we're making a phone call to a parent, sometimes they don't feel quite confident to do that by themselves. And so I might be there with them. And, just apologizing, like I said, really diffuses the situation. And then you say, okay, this is where we go from here. So just something to consider. Forgive yourself. We're not perfect. We're going to make mistakes. Oh my gosh, when I think of my career and all the mistakes I made, there were plenty of them. So forgive yourself and others. Your peers are going to make mistakes. Your students, I think we're more forgiving of our students than maybe necessarily. Well, I guess it depends. I probably shouldn't generalize that. Some students I think we're more forgiving of than others, and that's something to reflect on too. Are there students that you are more forgiving of? It's interesting. And then let go and move on. It's going to take a while to build that trust back up, but hopefully you've made a few steps and the direction you will continue will be positive. Okay, I am going to open this back up again for discussion. Does anyone want to share about a time where the trust was broken with you and a student, with you and a faculty member, whatever the case may be, and how that trust was rebuilt? I would love to hear some stories, something that you did just to help others think about what we can do to rebuild trust, whether it be in your classroom or with a peer or maybe with your principal. What are some ways that we can rebuild trust?
Well, this subject matter is getting to be tough now. I need to think about it for a couple minutes. Or
That's fine.
It can be a little embarrassing or uncomfortable.
Well, yes, definitely. And it goes back to vulnerability. We have to be vulnerable. We have to be open. I get it.
I'm hanging in there, but I might have to turn my camera off.
That's fine.
I have a situation where I don't know about necessarily breaking trust, but I really felt how I handled it helped build students' trust in me. Very first test that we did was a really tough one, and it was tough subject matter. And looking back now, I wrote a really, really tough test. And this was our first test, especially back from COVID and everything else. So, I don't feel like collectively I took everything into consideration. And again, it was my first test. Granted, it is an honors class, but I think between the students' reaction and grades, it was very apparent that I went a little bit rough on them. So, and I'm thinking, geez, this is my first test. They were all so discouraged because, they're high achieving students. And so I just first started out by asking them what I could do differently next time to help them, how I could handle lectures differently, how I could handle test review differently, because I told them, I still was going to challenge them, but I wanted to make sure that it wasn't overwhelming and that, as long as they did their part as well, that we were working together to help them do the best that they could. And that was really all I said. I didn't get a whole lot of feedback from them. I just kind of made some changes on my end. And then just listening to students' comments that they either told other teachers or told me directly throughout the rest of the year that was really impactful for them. They said they never had a teacher apologize to them for not preparing them enough for a test. And they just said it was really apparent to them right then and there that I really cared, and that it motivated them to actually try harder because they knew I cared and that I was human and that I had admitted I had made a mistake, but still, holding them to that higher standard. So just kind of being clueless about how to handle that situation, just kind of letting myself be vulnerable and honest with them, I really felt made a difference, and it really shaped how I handled future situations. So,
Carly, that is a great example. And I tell you, when I think about that, that is a brave teacher that asks their students, what can I do differently? I think that's wonderful that you asked them that and, involved them in that. And granted, they didn't give you a lot of feedback, but still just the idea that you asked that, it shows that you care about them. So that was a great example of this whole notion of teacher credibility in so many different ways. So thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay.
All I can just say one thing is that even though my students, they're not high school level, and I don't know how much they appreciate, self-reflecting, but I tend to talk out loud to them and say, I know that you guys were having trouble with this, and I think it's because it was such a different format than what we practiced. And I tell them out loud what I'm planning to do. I'm going to break you into groups when we do this next time, or blah, 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 and I will admit probably 50% of them don't care, don't listen, and don't seem to, but there's 50% who do give me a lot of positive feedback that, I could tell you really wanted us to be more successful the next time, or, I love that you give us chances to do this over again and improve our grade or whatever, So it's not always apparent because just as we're finding on the screen right now, some people are comfortable talking and some people aren't, but those kids who do give feedback are always very appreciative of teachers who, when they can tell that they're trying to help be more successful.
Great, thank you.
I have an example that's trust wasn't broken, but I teach second grade, and I've had over the last few years some students who really struggle with their emotions and dealing with things that make them unhappy or didn't go the way they wanted. And so I had a student this past year that would take anything that upset him or didn't go the way he wanted, and he'd reflect it back on whoever was around him, and it was their fault and their problem. So it really affected his social relationships, and he would even, come back at me that it was my fault that something happened. So it took a whole year, but we worked in small increments to how we would handle a situation that was upsetting. And so I tried to keep how I responded calm, controlled, and then guide him and give him words to help him look at what had happened. And eventually, later in the year, he could say, I messed up, or Mrs. Grammel, I need help. This made me upset. And he didn't just automatically lash out at someone else or take what he was upset about and put it back on them, even though they had nothing to do with what was going on. It was his feelings, but he couldn't own them at the time. He couldn't identify them. So I think by using consistency and then helping him develop that self-talk, it built trust. It just took a lot of time.
That's a great example, Ellen. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to go back here into my slideshow then. Okay, and next year, as things are going along, you might recognize, hopefully maybe from having attended this, maybe you'll recognize oh, maybe that trust was broken there, and what can I do to rebuild that trust? So hopefully some of this terminology will come back to you. Okay, can everyone see the competence slide? Okay, so we're done with trust. Thanks, Robert. We're done with trust. We're going to move on to competence. So competence is that students know the teachers know their stuff and they know how to teach that stuff. I love that definition, but we all understand exactly what that means. So students want the lesson to be organized and clear and engaging and well-paced and, all of those things that teachers want, but students want that also. So competence involves actually your content knowledge and pedagogical knowledge. Pedagogical, like how you're teaching. And just being honest with students, like if you don't know something, let them know you don't know that. That's okay. That kind of connects to a growth mindset session I had. Many of you were there for that. But, admit that you don't know something. Tell them you'll look it up, or ask someone in the classroom to look it up, or, whatever. It's okay to admit you don't know something. That shows that vulnerability. But obviously, you don't want that to be a lot of the time. Hopefully, for the most part, you have that content knowledge. And teacher clarity is really key for this. And like I said, we're going to really focus on this next year. So this is just going to be a very superficial look at teacher clarity. But the teacher needs to know what they're teaching and they need the students to know what they're going to learn. And for those of you who are with me with developing assessment capable learners, this is going to be very familiar to you. So the teacher knows what the students need to learn. The teacher communicates these learning intentions. And then the students know, okay, well, this is what I'm going to learn. And then they'll be able to know if they've mastered the content or not using success criteria. So the learning intentions should just, what are they going to learn today? Why are they learning it? Relevance. We've talked a lot about relevance if you've been in these sessions. And how will I know that I have learned it? Success criteria. So in this book, there's a lot of talk about this idea of gradual release of responsibility. And basically what that means, this is just common sense for a teacher. So you start out really tight with them and you're teaching the lesson, you're going over the content, and you gradually release them so that they can start to take on more of the ownership. And these are basically the components. So you start with like a focused instruction, and then the guided instruction pieces where they're kind of starting to work by themselves, but you're going around and trying to see if anybody has any misunderstandings, or let's say they're working on problems, you want to try to catch any, big mistakes that they might be making right from the start. So you're just starting to release them. And then obviously independent learning is when they're working on their own. And then collaborative learning, where they take that learning even further and they collaborate with a group. So the reason this is in here is because this is the whole idea of competence, that a competent teacher, and you guys, you're probably, I'm sure you're just automatically doing this. You never really thought about the fact that you are doing this, but this is what competent teachers do. So focused instruction, you establish the learning intentions and the success criteria. You might model your own thinking as far as the lesson. And in this book, there's a lesson checklist for competence, like while you're lesson planning. So if that's something you find that you might, benefit from, again, you might want to buy that book. But I can't really share that because that is copyrighted. But there is a checklist in there that just helps you to make sure that you are planning for competence. And then guided instruction, like I said, this is the part where you're noticing if students are having any misunderstandings or misconceptions that you might want to try to correct before they start their independent learning. You can use different prompts where you're asking them questions, you're asking comprehension questions, some cues, you might have some visual cues in the classroom for them to use to help them shift that learning. And then also, obviously, you do want to make sure that they understand the relevance of whatever you're teaching them that they're learning. And then again, there's some resources in the book for guided instruction. There's a template to guide students through the whole inquiry process, and we'll talk about that more in a minute. And then there's a guided instruction checklist when you're lesson planning that's in the book. But this whole inquiry process is really big, and I hope that you guys try to incorporate as much inquiry as you can into your lessons. But you ask questions, just a lot of, in the beginning, just trying to brainstorm and ask questions. And then you'd start to do some investigating, planning what you're going to do, maybe reading, researching, and then they can kind of create whatever it is. You might allow them to pick, student choice, what they want to create to show that they've mastered something, or you might, tell them, this is what I want you to create, and they do that. And then hopefully you discuss whatever it is they created, maybe give the students time to share that. And then you reflect and you think about, okay, let's think about this lesson. What did I learn from that? What do I need to change for the future? So this whole inquiry-based learning. And again, I'm sure you guys do this already, but this is just all in the concept of competence. And then as you're sure that the students pretty much understand what they're going to do, then you set them loose and let them learn independently, whatever that may be. And hopefully, again, you have a variety of different activities that the students can engage in with that. Hopefully you're not just giving worksheets, and I'm sure that you're not. But then you let them to actually start to wrestle with those concepts. And there is an independent learning checklist in the book also when you lesson plan. And then finally, collaborative learning, where they're starting to share what they learned with each other. You know, maybe from there, there's going to be a project or something even further, but, you know, the group works together to increase their knowledge. And there's a collaborative learning checklist in the book also. Okay, so collective efficacy, and when you think about competence, and I think back on my career, there were some teachers that I can say probably weren't as competent as I would have liked them to be. And that's where the principals gets in there and starts trying to coach the teachers. At least hopefully that's happening. But when you think about your peers, I want you to think about, you know, was there a peer or a colleague that you felt really wasn't competent, wasn't really doing the job that they should have been doing? And it's amazing how that colleague can become isolated, whether they're isolating themselves or whether the other teachers are isolating that colleague. It could be in faculty meetings, it could be at the lunch table, you know, either involving them in discussions or not. There's a whole, you know, range of how this could happen. But, you know, I want you to think about your particular team, and if there's someone on your team that you think is being isolated, whether, like I said, it's intentionally or not, and maybe what you can do to change the trajectory of that teacher's credibility. You know, how can you help that teacher to become more involved? Now, obviously, I'm not asking you, you know, to go in and start coaching that teacher, but just how you can involve them in small ways, whether it be into the discussion or maybe suggesting peer observations with that teachers. And you can go in and maybe observe, maybe give them a few pointers. I mean, there's just so many different things that you can do, especially if you have a newer teacher in your building that, you know, I think back on my first year of teaching, it was a disaster. I was in a Cincinnati public school. I don't know that I really had control of my classroom. It was a nightmare. So, you know, all of us struggle our first few years of teaching. And, you know, what could you do if there is a new teacher that's struggling? So just some things to think about. Does anybody want to share maybe a time in your past where you helped a teacher, maybe a teacher that was struggling? And it doesn't necessarily have to be an incompetent teacher, but maybe just something that you did that you could share with the rest of us to learn from.
I'd like to say I like strengths, but there's something that I've seen that they're really good at. We have a lot of young teachers at St. Al's, a lot of teachers who are just starting out. And, you know, I'll go to them like, I saw this in the hall. That is so cool. Where did you get that idea? And even though, you know, or if I hear that maybe they're having trouble, like parents are saying, they're too critical of my child, or, you know, or like I try to make it where I can get something from them too, and giving advice, you know, that we can learn from each other, and try to really encourage them for the things that I see them doing well. Because I think if people know that they've got strengths, they can expand those strengths to other areas.
That's great. What about the rest of you? Like, are there any mentors out there? And think about, what do you do with your new teachers?
I was going to say something about our lunch programs or our lunch times. The primary teachers get to eat lunch together. The intermediate, the junior high and it's a chance for idea swapping. And it's an enjoyable time, not to mention the fraternity of it all.
That's
that
great.
comes in. That's very helpful.
And hopefully no one's being isolated from that. You know, this is totally off the topic, but Robert made me think of this. When I was principal at St. Peter and Paul, we had a rule, and I didn't come up with this. We had a rule in the lunch room that you were not allowed to talk about school. You weren't allowed to talk about students. You weren't allowed to talk about parents. No school stuff. It had to be all other outside stuff. I loved it. They loved it. I realize there are times you got to vent, but I don't know that the lunchroom is always that perfect time for that. So something to think about, if you think your colleagues would be open to that lunchtime is just other time. It's not school business time. Does anybody do anything like that at all? No.
Sure we do. Sports is a big thing in Cincinnati.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
I think last year was just such a challenge. I mean, I know that many days we ate in isolation.
Yeah.
It's hard to remember when you'd walk into and we weren't spaced out, 10 feet away from each other. But almost, obviously we try to keep it on weekend plans or, people's own children or parties, weddings, all those kinds of things that the people have in their lives.
Right.
It makes it, got to know each other.
At St. Margaret of York, we have common planning times with the middle school teachers. And we found that's a really great time to help some of the newer teachers when they have challenges with parents, not quite sure how to handle it. It seems like there's a good balance of teachers with some experience with the new teachers that we're able to kind of find that common time to help navigate those areas. And it's been helpful for me on both ends and to find out some of the newer ideas in education and things like that. So that's worked well in our school.
That's a great idea, Karen. Thank you. Okay, I'm gonna jump right back in here. Okay, I will give you a break, I promise, maybe in a few minutes here, but let's just keep going. Let's talk about dynamism. Okay, so the third component of teacher credibility is dynamism. So the teacher's ability to communicate that enthusiasm that they have for their subject, for their students, for just school in general. And teachers who are dynamic, we came up with great words for dynamism. So what a dynamic teacher is. I'm sure you can recognize a dynamic teacher. Does this mean that you have to be, all energetic and enthusiastic all the time? Definitely not. All of us have different personalities. And, some of you who maybe are a little more introverted, you're not going to be this high energy, enthusiastic teacher all the time, but you can be dynamic in different ways. It could be in the ways, that you plan your lessons, in the activities that your students are performing. So I don't want everyone to think that you got to be this high energy, teacher that's not quite what this means. I mean, it's great if you are, that's a component of it, but that you love your job, you love your students, and you exude that love, you know, to the students. And it doesn't necessarily have to be in this overbearing way. And again, these are just, like I said, you know, taking creative and innovative approaches. That could be another way a person, you know, is a dynamic teacher, conveying that relevance to students. This is why this is important. This is how you're going to use it out in your daily life. There's many ways to be dynamic and not just in the high energy sense. So relevance, you know, how can this material be relevant in their lives? And these are just some ways that you can do that, you know, just for the sake of learning this material, or maybe you have specific examples outside of the walls in their lives that you can give them why they need to learn this particular material, or maybe this material will help you learn more about yourself. And then just some ideas on how you can increase dynamism. And I have some examples after this slide, but maybe if, you know, students are reading or something, or looking at a graph, or, you know, researching, looking at internet sites, maybe you give them some kind of data collection tool. There's all kinds of foldables, different ways to fold paper that they can use to, you know, like graphic organizer that they can manipulate with their hands, which is pretty the same thing as an envelope fold. Presentation slides, you know, you can have them present something. You can think about your own presentation style, and, you know, if you use PowerPoint, Google Slides, Prezi, whatever it is, you know, hopefully it's not too wordy, and maybe you have some visuals in there. Think about your font type and size. All of this contributes to dynamism. So then just some ideas of some foldables that you might want to have the students create. This is a figurative language. I realize this is probably kind of hard to see, but, you know, rules for math, so like exponent rules. And then if, like, instead of doing a book report, maybe they do a foldable like this. It's all about their book, and they have to talk about the title, the author, genre, setting, main and supporting characters, you know, depending on, you know, what you're learning. Or they're learning, not you're learning. This could be some just as simple as compound words. Maybe this is a spelling unit, and you have them create a little foldable for compound words. This is angles. So if you're a math teacher, they could just do this. I mean, it's just basically a graphic organizer, but it helps them to manipulate it. Again, this is just another way you could fold paper. So that's really all I have on dynamism. Does anybody, I would love examples on, and it doesn't necessarily have to be yourself, but ways that you've seen teachers demonstrate dynamism.
I've seen teaching. One thing I try to do, I don't always do it, is you have to start the class right. I have to start the class right away. Let's start it as if every minute matters, and or else I get the class just explodes with talking. You know, but let's start right away. And here's the targeted behavior, or here's the targeted learning. Let's get started, and we'll worry about other things later. But I need to get started right away, or else I lose control of the classroom.
So your enthusiasm comes through because, like, you're excited about it and you want to start right away. Yeah, that's great. What else?
I'd like to say it's true what you say about like introverts and extroverts, and And there is a different way that those two type of individuals will start their classes. And I have to say that the teachers who are introverts, they have to work a little harder to present, to have an activity that's so engaging that the kids are going to tune in right away and know that something good is coming, because, you know, it's not necessarily going to be because this teacher's up there performing. Their activity, their content, and the kids are so confident about what they're learning and that it's going to be interesting. I sometimes feel like they have to work a little harder to make sure their content's there. As the extroverted teachers, sometimes they can make something that really isn't that exciting sound exciting, but it is just interesting, you know. So it's a matter of what do you want to be most important, what the kids are doing, or what you're saying, or how you're saying it, you know. But that's what you see with, you know, just a variety of things in the classroom.
Sharon, I love math, and Susan used to be my principal, and I used to work with Mallory, and I think they probably can attest to this, that is like my excitement of the day, and every kid knows that, and every kid who comes into my class at the beginning of the school year, and if they say they like math or don't like math, I say, by the end of the year, you will love math. And 99.9% of the time, they love math. They send me notes, you know, and say, you made math fun. This was exciting. I used to hate math. I love it now. And, but I have a hard time doing, having that enthusiasm for some of the other subjects, because I don't feel as competent in those. And I think sometimes that's where I need to work on. Especially, I know we teach our own religion, and my partner that I teach with knows, I feel like she knows it so much better than I do. And sometimes I feel like I need to take a lesson from her.
But you know, Kathleen, that's huge that you recognize that, because then you know that you have to take that effort to be more dynamic in that religion class, because it doesn't come as naturally. So that's great, just that recognition of that.
But it makes me upset that I can't do that.
But I bet you are doing
I
that.
want to be excited about everything. You know what I mean? I want them to be excited about everything. And it's hard because you know, how do you make I say, how do you make yourself more competent? I understand to learn more about the knowledge, you know, to get yourself more knowledgeable, but sometimes the subject matter just doesn't click with you, or it's just not your cup of tea that you want to make exciting. You know what I mean?
Yes. Does anybody have any
I'm working towards it,
suggestions
though.
for Kathleen?
Not a suggestion, but I never wanted to teach math or science. I find that you really have to explain to or show the kids the relevance of it. And I as a student of those classes that I only got C's in, I never understood why we were doing all this algebra, or, you know, these, and if you can make it relevant to the kids. And I my hats are off to math and science teachers to make that subject alive and meaningful to them.
Well, I don't teach algebra. I teach third grade, so I have lots of tricks up my sleeve for multiplication and, you know, talking about coordinate grids. We put a grid on the floor, and they get to actually walk on the floor and find that point on the map or the grid, if you want to use that. It's just fun. I just try to make it as fun as possible. And I used to teach music, and the kids loved music too. So I try to incorporate the music into that. But it just seems that religion for me is my heart. I mean, I'm Catholic, been Catholic all my life, and I know a lot, but it just seems like sometimes that's the hard to make is exciting, because they see, yes, God loves me. Yes, what we do reflects everything. We should respect everybody. We should treat them as equals. We should treat them as ourselves. But it just seems like that's a hard one to make exciting. I mean, you can do it really reading. I think you can make exciting language. You can incorporate lots of stuff. And those are the classes that I teach. I don't teach the science or the social studies. My team teacher teaches that. But I really think religion is the hardest one to make exciting. And that's why we're here. But it just seems hard to do sometimes.
Well, and I wonder, Kathleen, maybe observing some other religion teachers, maybe, you know, ask your principal, who would you say is the most dynamic religion teacher, and go and observe them, see if you can pick up any ideas from him or her. But I loved what you said before, like how you bring music into your class. That's a great example of dynamism. The grid on the floor, the more you can make something hands-on, that to me, that's a dynamic lesson. So great examples. Okay, maybe one more. Any other ideas how to make a lesson dynamic?
I'd like to share. There's a teacher at our school who has left and retired. I asked her if I could observe her teach because I was struggling with a group of students, and she allowed me to come in and observe. And she was teaching language arts, and they were, I guess, dissecting sentence parts of the sentence, noun, verbs, probably the most boring thing, but she is such a dynamic teacher. She makes it the most interesting thing. One of the things I noticed about her is she slows the pacing down of her lesson. She's not trying to move through it real fast, but she's patient. So I think that slowing, and that's something I know that I need to work on, because I tried to get through so many things in my lesson and rush through, but slow the pacing down for them, and being patient, giving them time to get their materials. The class just seemed to be calm. She truly cared about every single kid that was sitting in her room. Very genuine teacher. And
great. Thank you. You know, you have those teachers that'll dress up as different people. I think that's maybe easier if you're history or language arts, but you know, that's an example of how to bring dynamism in. There's just so many ways you can do it. And again, it doesn't have to be by your personality. Okay, so I want to stop there. I want us to take a break. Let's come back at, let's say 10:40. I'm not gonna, I usually just give 15 minutes, but I'm not gonna, we'll just say 10:40, we'll all come back. If you haven't put your name and school in the chat, if you would do that, that would be wonderful. And I'll see you on the other side of the break. You can just mute your microphones and turn your video off if you want. Thank you. Okay, I think it's 10:40, so if you guys are out there, if you can turn your video on so I know that you're back. Okay, looks like most of us are here. So how we doing? Everything okay so far? Probably ready to be done so you can get out there and enjoy that beautiful sunshine out there. Okay. I don't know that we will go till 12. I'm not sure. Don't hold me to that, but we might not. So yeah, I'm with you. If we can get out a couple minutes, that's awesome. Early. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again. Okay, so we just talked about dynamism and we have one more component. Okay, so the last one, as we said, is immediacy. And the idea of immediacy is, you know, a lot of you said now, urgent, which is all kind of true. But the teachers are accessible and that they're relatable. In other words, we are immediate to the students because they can relate to us. It might be the actual physical proximity to a student where we move around the room and we can easily interact with them. And urgency is a part of that because a lot of you said now and urgency. You know, learning is very important, and you know, students a lot of times that you know they want to do it now, and sometimes we don't. We want to convey the message that you know learning takes time too. So, but it's just that idea of that you are there for them when they need you. And the effect size immediacy actually is on John Hattie's. It's one of his activity or one of his meta-analysis. And the effect size is 0.66. And this is something that I wish, if I was still teaching, I think I would do this. Maybe it's easy for me to say now when I'm not really teaching, but there is what's called a nonverbal immediacy self-report assessment in the book. And I have a picture of it here, but it's kind of hard to see. But the idea is you could either take a video of yourself and then self-evaluate, or you could ask a peer to come in and just kind of grade you on some of these statements. So I use my hands and arms to gesture while I'm talking. And this is specifically in the classroom. You know, I touch others on the shoulder or arm. I use a monotone or a dull voice. I look over or away from others when I'm talking to them. There was a teacher I had at one of my schools that, not quite sure why, but when you would talk to this teacher, she wouldn't necessarily look you in the eye. And at first, when she first came to the school, it kind of rubbed teachers the wrong way. Like they didn't understand why she wasn't looking at them. And I think sometimes maybe she portrayed this sense of like, this isn't important, so I'm not going to look at you. But just came to find out that that's just the way she is. You know, I think sometimes she looks away. Maybe she's processing what you're saying or whatever the case may be. But, you know, that would be something for her to know. And I actually did even have a conversation with her about this. You know, because I think sometimes we're not even aware of some of these things that we do and how others react to that. So you kind of get the idea. It talks about your body position, if you're frowning, eye contact, a lot with your voice. Are you animated? So you get the idea. So you could have, like I said, someone observe you and rate you, or you could do it yourself. And it just might be a really nice tool for you as a teacher to gauge where you are with immediacy. And then this is just another one. This one's already filled out. I just found this one on the internet. I just Googled it. Same kind of idea though, where you could do this yourself or you could have someone observe you. And then what are just some things you can do to improve immediacy? So, try to gesture more when you're talking and you're not just standing really stiff and in position and not moving much. Look at the class. I know a lot of this is just common sense. Look at the class. Eye contact with all students. Smiling goes such a long way versus a teacher that just never smiles. If you think back on your schooling, can you think of a teacher that never smiled, or at least didn't smile much, and think about the impact that teacher had on you? I'm guessing it maybe wasn't very positive, versus a teacher that maybe does smile a lot, and think about the impact that teacher had on you as a student. Circulating around the room, calling students by name. That goes a long way, calling students by name. And I don't know if you guys even noticed, but when you're talking, sometimes I will make an intentional effort to say your name, just because it goes a long way, saying students' names and making sure you know how to pronounce them and you pronounce them correctly. That's one of the worst things you could do to a student, is just call them by the wrong name all year, or even for a week. That's not good. But use we and us as referring to the class, like we're all in this together. We're a big family and we're all going to learn together. Inviting students to provide feedback. Oh, now who was that? That wasn't Ellen, was it? Who was that asked their class about what they could do?
That was me, Carly.
Carly. That is huge right there. That was definitely increasing your immediacy with them, because just like you said, they could tell that you cared about them, but that you were there for them. So that's huge. And then just using a whole variety with your voice, pausing, inflections, emphasis. There was a teacher at St. Teresa that taught with a very quiet voice. And it was wonderful. I mean, she wasn't one of those, really exuberant teachers. She was just a very quiet teacher, but it had such a calming effect on her students. It was wonderful. As you can tell, I'm one of those loud people, but she was, I just loved going into her classroom, and it was just like, it's just very calming. But think about, whispering, just different voice inflections. Just some more ideas, maybe take advantage of when you go out to recess, or I don't know if you ever have lunch supervision, but taking advantage of those times to get to know your students. Any barriers that you might have. Good thing it's not COVID, we had all kinds of barriers with COVID. I mean, it still is COVID, but you know what I mean. So maybe we can start to take some of those plexiglass dividers down and all that kind of stuff. But, this is a great suggestion. If you have a smart board and you find that you're stuck at the front of the room because of that smart board, try to get one of those tablets where you can walk around the room and you can get close to the students. If you're lecturing, hopefully you're not lecturing long. I don't like the word lecture. I like the word direct instruction. But anyway, ask questions. Ask them to share their thinking. You share your thinking. Pause, make eye contact, just walk around the room, just do different things just to, make it different. And then help students not to be intimidated by those difficult concepts, like try to really build them up beforehand. I know one thing, I wish I had one of my math students in this. One thing I always did, and I bet it drove them crazy, is because I would come into the class all the time and I would say, okay, what we're going to learn today is so easy. You will pick this up right away, because I always thought it was easy and I always thought they would pick it up right away. But, it's interesting, but don't do that every day, probably like I did. But, let them know that it's, maybe today's concept will be a little easier. There's nothing wrong with telling them that. But then again, you might want to say, hey, this concept today it's going to be harder. You're going to have to really work hard on it. I don't want you to give up. This whole idea of productive struggle. which, you know, we've talked about for those of you who have been in my sessions. So all of those different things you can do is just to improve that immediacy, that you're there with them and you're there for them. Actual proximity, you know, you might want to reflect on this. Think about your classroom and think about the path that you find yourself taking a lot. You know, are you at the front of the room? Do you just walk around the perimeter of the room? Do you go up and down aisles? What do you do? Think about what you do. And then, you know, you might want to think about, you know, because if you're starting to do the same thing over and over, that's not good. But at the same time, you do want to get close to them. You know, if you're staying up in the front of the room all the time, I'm encouraging you now, please stop that, go walk around the room. I bet most of you walk around the room. But you know, like, and this is interesting, the T pattern, like the first, maybe some of you are in the front of the room or maybe the middle of the room. Just think about that. Maybe think about changing your seating plans so that you can get around to all of the different students. Maybe even giving intentional, like being intentional about giving more eye contact to a student, or calling on a specific student, or just having more interactions with a particular student, especially our lower achieving students. And I'm going to show you a slide here in a minute, how we tend to not pay as much attention to our lower achieving students. And that's probably, I'm probably not telling you something that you don't know. You know, I think sometimes, like, with our lower achieving students, we put them in the front of the room and we think, okay, well, see, look, I'm doing more for the student. They're in the front of the room. But that's not enough, you know. Think about, and this is research. So I found this, I wanted to, read through these. I'm not going to read them all. But these are things that a teacher typically does with lower achieving students. Are seated further away. I don't always agree with that one, but
I don't know what get less wait time means.
so, like, if I ask a question, Robert, remember before when I asked a question and nobody was answering and I was just waiting and waiting and not saying anything and waiting, and I said, okay, I'm comfortable with this wait time. That's what that wait time is. So you ask a question, and when no one answers, you just want to jump in because you're uncomfortable with that silence. And that's why I said, I'm comfortable with wait time. I was okay waiting, but that's something that kind of comes with experience. I think when you're a newer teacher, you don't like that silence, and so you just jump in. So especially for lower achieving students, like, we ask them a question, and if they don't answer right away, we just think, oh, they don't know it, and you jump right in. Versus asking the question and just stopping and giving them time to think and process. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yes,
Okay.
it does. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. What do you guys think about this list? I'm not asking you specifically, in general, of teachers, do you find some of these things to be true, not true? What are your takeaways on this list?
Well, during the Zoom times with COVID, it seemed like that wait time took forever for the kid to respond. By the time he turned his microphone back on and gave an answer, it said the class is bored to tears.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Sometimes I think it's almost the opposite at our school, that we focus so much on the lower kids that we do call on them more often, and we spend more time with them than our higher achieving students.
That's a good point, Kathy.
Yeah, I agree with Kathy. I feel like we find more ways to praise them and build them up, and definitely put them in the front of the classroom, which is sometimes, I think, kind of painful to them in a way, because they always are sitting by the teacher or near the teacher, and I think they start to pick up on that. but yeah, I would agree with some of them. Like sometimes you call on them less often if you're in a hurry to get something finished. You're like, I can't really. I need to call on the kids who are going to know the answer for this one. But yeah, I would say I would disagree with many of those things actually, which is good. I think many good teachers actually do the opposite of that.
I agree, but I know with my lower kids for like reading, and there's a read aloud, I do call on them less often because I don't want to embarrass them or make them feel uncomfortable, you know, because they're reading aloud and a lot of them, the lower ones, are going to struggle with the reading. But like with math, if I see that there's a child that's struggling with math, I tend to call on them a little more because I want to make sure that they're understanding the problem or the concept that I'm teaching.
Yeah, that's a good point, Christina. And I'd like to think that that's just a testament to how great our schools are and how great all of you are, that you're finding these to be not true. That's wonderful.
I think teachers make them not true, but I still think we have some work to do to make the other students, their classmates, do these, because I do see that in groups. It could be a smart child who they don't perceive as a good reader. No one's paying attention to what they're saying. You know, like they're not included in the ideas or tasks. They are definitely criticized more by the other kids. You know, well, you can't even do this, so I'm not gonna. Yeah. So I think it's good we're doing that and we're modeling it as teachers, but I think we need to give some instructions to our students about how to do that too.
That's a great point. Okay. Vulnerability, this is just kind of a part of this whole idea too. You know, we need to show vulnerability so that, you know, our students do feel closer to us. We need to, again, I'm not saying share every, you know, facet of your life, but open up to them and, you know, talk to them about maybe your family or what you did on the weekend or whatever the case may be, but just to build that relationship. And then, you know, let students know about your struggles and failures so that they know you're human. And then that they can model from that, like, oh, you know, Mrs. Smith had problems too, so it's normal that I'm going to have problems. And all of that you can share with them, just being honest about all of that, the better. And it builds that relationship and it helps them. So where does, you know, immediacy kind of fall into with collective teacher efficacy? And we kind of talked about this again or previously, but just be aware of some of those things, like when you're together as a group, whether you're, you know, either with a partner teacher or if you're in a grade level meeting or a grade level band, you know, what are some, you know, just watch other people, just sit and watch sometime, you know, look at their eye contact, look at their body language, just any kind of signs that you might pick up and just see if you can notice anything, you know, see if you can figure out, do you think somebody's getting isolated, and anything you can do to kind of help that whole idea of collective teacher efficacy, because we have to work together. Every one of us has to feel that we are an important part of the team, and we have to, you know, work together as a team. And if not, you know, that breakdown is really going to affect our students. And so anything you can do to build up that team, the better. And I realize that a lot, you know, I realize you're teachers and this is more for principals, but I really do feel like you guys can make an impact, you know, with your grade level teams. So just something to think about. Okay, so I'd love to hear, we can either answer this question, you know, first of all, I think we all know why it's crucial, so I don't really want to take time with that, but, you know, what can you do to promote immediacy, or what have you seen some other teachers do, some great ideas that you've had to promote immediacy? Some of you we haven't heard from today. Do I sound like a teacher now? Some of our newer teachers out there, what have you seen, you know, veteran teachers do that you've observed? Somebody started talking and I cut them off. I apologize.
That's
Karen,
okay.
go ahead.
It was me. Hi. I was just thinking, lost my train of thought for a second here.
Because I interrupted you.
No, I remember now. Maybe planning less, like be more realistic with my daily goals and objectives, and spend more time being maybe reflective, allowing time at the end of class for more questions and reflection and learning, like what worked for us today. So sometimes you feel like there's so many different aspects of language arts that you need to uncover and discuss that sometimes maybe it's better to allow students time to absorb the learning. So I feel like that's something I could work on.
I love that idea, Karen, when you talked about asking them what worked for us today. Like, you know, some of you probably do exit slips, you know, rather than maybe focusing on content, maybe you ask that question, you know, what worked for you today? What didn't work, you know, and trying to get more, kind of like Carly did, we're asking her class, you know, what works for you? What can I do differently? So great point.
Before COVID times, I know I spent way too much time at the piano, with the piano separating me from the students. And it took a younger teacher that came in to observe me to say, Brother Bob, step away from the piano, come out. And I knew that, but you just get comfortable and
you
get a little bit older and you just get set in my ways. But I'm actually practicing going up and down the aisles and as we sing a song without piano and see how things work.
That's a great example of that physical barrier I was talking about. Yes, that's great. And Robert, I'm sorry I've been calling you Robert. It should have been Brother Bob, huh?
The physical barriers, I think, can be a big factor. Last year, one of our junior high social studies and religion teachers, he was quite distraught because when they put down new carpeting and everything over the summer, his lectern, the thing that he used, that he apparently was used to standing on, it disappeared. And he had all kinds of stuff he had decorated with it. And he looked everywhere, but he could not teach with it last year. And he said he really had to totally change the whole way he taught. And it threw him for a loop because he was also trying to keep his distance socially, you know, from the kids. But he didn't realize how much he had been stuck behind that podium. And so anyway, so that was good for him. And at the same time, those of us who don't teach behind something, when I was in the Leadership Academy, I recall that most of the people were secondary, and mind you, you know, this was back before the internet was used as much. So I had to stay behind this thing. And I felt like I was tongue-tied. I could not talk. The minute I walked away from that thing, I could present to this college level class, no problem. As long as I had to stay put and stand there behind that, I felt very restricted. So you know, people have, you know, they have their comfort levels.
Yeah.
And but it's different. But so people can learn, especially if they're forced to. And I think, you know, I think there's a great potential for teachers to change, you know, just by practicing it.
Yeah, that's great. Any other examples?
I find myself using, I walk around the room all the time. I'm very much like you, Susan. I'd prefer to walk around and be out in the midst of them versus being in the front. But when I go to teaching math and it's a newer concept, or I'm teaching a strategy, I find myself at the smart board more. And then I'm trying to sneak out to show something and then back up at the smart board. And my partner teacher last year, we used Smart Learning Suites, but they've made an update where you can connect with your iPad to it. Mine wasn't always working quite correctly, or it may have been used for error sometimes also. But my partner teacher caught onto it really quickly, and so she was using her iPad and out walking around. So that's one of the things I know I'm going to really work on this year, is how could I use that? Because that way they can see what I'm writing on the board, but I'm also monitoring right next to them, which will make it so much better.
That's great. Okay, let's head on back then. Uh-oh, there it goes. Okay. Okay, so, you know, the name of this session was Teacher Credibility, which we have talked about, but it was also collective teacher efficacy. So I want to kind of weave in some of this teacher collective efficacy now. And I found this next part to be very interesting. I hope that you do too. But when we look at teacher credibility and collective efficacy, there's 4 types that emerge, 4 types of teachers, okay? So first you have the talker. So this is the talker. This person has, now, just because you're a talker doesn't mean you fall into this, because you have to listen to the characteristics. So this is a person that has low credibility, but high collective efficacy. So here's some examples. They're professionally generous with colleagues. They'll do anything that a colleague asks them to do, okay? That they love this whole idea of team. They value the company of their colleagues. They have a very optimistic view about their colleagues. But when it comes to the students, they have more of a pessimistic view. They kind of have lower expectations of the students. They themselves might be held in lower regard by the students because, again, remember how I said teachers can pick up on that teacher credibility. And they're just very low impact. They rarely turn ideas into actions. You know, they talk a big talk, but then when it comes to follow through, they don't necessarily follow through. Okay, so these teachers, again, great with colleagues, very personable, you know, they talk a good talk, but then when it comes down to it with the students, they're a little lacking. Okay, and think of your staff that you work with, and there may not be any talkers, but think about it, and I'm not going to ask you to name any names, obviously, but think about, are there people you work with that might fall into this category? So low credibility with the students, high credibility with the staff. Okay, so that's one. Now we have what's called the amplifier, where they have high credibility and high collective teacher efficacy. So they have the best of both worlds. They're very professionally generous with their colleagues. They value their colleagues so much that they want to learn from their colleagues. They have optimistic views of their colleagues and the students and just school in general, leadership, parents. They are perceived by colleagues and students to be very credible, trustworthy, dynamic, caring, competent. And these are those leaders on your staff where students and colleagues really reach their full potential because of this person, because of their mentoring or their teaching. I am hoping and I'm guessing that you can think of people on your staff that fall under this category. I can't imagine being in a school and not being able to think of someone that falls into this category. I sure hope that's not the case. And knowing our Catholic schools, I would bet that many, many, many teachers fall into this category. So then you have the loner. I don't know that I like these titles, but the loner who has low credibility and low collective teacher efficacy. So these are the ones that are isolated by their colleagues. They pretty much kind of stay in their own classroom. They do their own thing. They don't really share a lot about what they're doing with the students. They don't share a lot about their lives. They're very pessimistic about their colleagues and the students and the school, maybe the leadership. These students just, you can tell they don't want to necessarily be in this classroom. They don't really like this teacher. Just in there trying to check off the boxes to survive, to pass. These teachers are not held in high regard by the students, and they really are starting to contemplate, is this really the right profession for me? So think about, again, your school. Again, I'm not going to ask you to name names, but can you think of, gosh, I hope there aren't many, but can you think of someone in your school that might be a loner? Just a very negative person. And then finally, the fourth one is the independent contractor. I do like the name of this one. So this is the teacher that has high credibility with the students, but low collective teacher efficacy. So they do an outstanding job in their classroom, but they don't really want to share any of that with the staff. So they isolate themselves kind of from the staff, and it might not be necessarily physical isolation, but they just don't share a lot. What they're doing is private, in their classroom. They have a pessimistic view of the colleagues and the school leadership, but definitely an optimistic view of the students. It's all about that classroom time. Like I said, they're not really open to sharing, ideas with others, but in their classroom, they're doing a tremendous job. They're perceived as being competent and trustworthy and dynamic and accessible and immediate and all of those things we learned about and talked about. But with their colleagues, not so much. So again, think about staff you work with. Do you have any independent contractors? And you might not. You might not have people that fall into some of these categories. So I'm not going to ask you to share this, but I'd like you to also reflect on, what category do you see yourself in? Do you see yourself falling in a certain category? And if so, why? And then without naming any names, I would just like you to share, if someone in one of these categories came to your mind, tell us a little bit about that person, why they're like this, and this is why I would consider them an independent contractor. Or did anyone just right away come to your mind as falling in one of those categories? Please, obviously, no names. Go ahead, Brother Bob.
Yeah, Brother Bob. There's a little bit of competition, and that I want to keep some of my techniques and my successes to myself. And I'm not, why did this unit work so well, or how come the kids are singing so well? I don't want to give away all my secrets.
So that's how you're saying you think sometimes, or other teachers think?
Well, I'm a little bit of that one, independent contractor or something. I didn't write down all the titles, but I have a tendency to teach that way.
Interesting.
I'll give away some techniques, but it took me years to establish this stuff, and so.
And is that because you're threatened by the success of others? Or why do you, I know that was really hitting it hard, but why are you like that, do you think?
At this time, I'll let somebody else step in until I come up with an answer.
That'll take some self-reflection, huh?
I should have never said anything.
Brother Bob, I think that you are waiting and you're going to write some bestseller book, secrets, after you retire. That's what you just don't want to disclose them on the talk show or something. But
oh, there you go.
Well, I don't know if I'm clever enough to come up with some of these titles like independent, whatever it was already. I forget.
Independent contractor. Yeah.
I can think of one teacher, and he fits into the learner category in many ways, except one, is he does sometimes talk about, his personal life. But he does give me concern, and because I do hear that, the kids dread going to his class. They feel like he's very negative, that he tells them how unsuccessful they are and how doesn't, he expresses his disappointment with them constantly. And, and I have seen him, I've walked past his classroom and seen him after school. And I'm like, you look like you have the weight of the world on your shoulders. And he's like, I'm just questioning whether I should even continue in this profession. And, the sad part is that he's been doing this for 25 years. So, there's a lot of students that he's impacted in that way, but I think he can be very negative. And rather than telling them, that he believes in them, he's constantly telling them, you should know that's what's wrong with you, kind of thing. And I think it does have its impact.
Yes. What about the amplifier? Can anybody think of an amplifier in their building? High credibility, high collective teacher efficacy?
Definitely. I can think of a few amplifiers in our building, and they're just amazing with their colleagues. They're excited about what they're doing, so that carries over to all of us. And they're so excited and love their students and what they're doing and how they're helping them. They want to share it with us, and then all of that genuineness comes out in their classroom. So that when you talk to students, or my own children have had them, they're so excited and know they're cared for and loved, that it just goes on all levels with students and colleagues.
That's great. Anyone else? Can you think of an amplifier?
I need the definition again of what the amplifier is.
That's the person that's high credibility with the students. So they're doing great in the classroom. They really respect the teacher. The teacher's really getting through to the student, but they're also very high with collective teacher efficacy. So have great relationship with their staff also.
Yeah, that's me.
Sorry, Brother Bob, go ahead.
Well, that's not me, but we have several teachers on our staff that the other teachers look up to, and they're a lot of fun. In the minute or two we're all in the hallway gathering the students up, and there's time for maybe an occasional TGIF that you just toss around ideas, and they're just a joy to work with.
That's great. Okay, I apologize. I cut somebody else off there. Who else was starting to say something? Okay, maybe they just weren't muted or something. Okay, great. So that gives you something to think about. So, I'd like you to reflect on what kind of teacher you are, and hopefully you work toward being an amplifier. Okay, so as we talked about, strong collective efficacy, it really encourages teachers, to take the skills they have to share them with other teachers so that as a unit, as a team, we all get better to help our students. We can all function more productively. We can make a bigger impact on the lives of our students. And then just some ideas, you know, when you're actually in your teams to think about, you know, when a team experiences success, that does wonders for this whole collective teacher efficacy. Because you know that the reason you achieved that success was because you all worked together as a team. And so, you know, that's amazing to really take time to reflect on your successes. You know, if you're meeting in PLCs or grade level meetings, whatever you call them, take time to reflect on your successes. And the reason why you were successful, again, is probably because you worked together as a team. And then modeling that. The more you can model this whole idea of, you know, self-efficacy and teacher collective efficacy, the better. I know when I was a principal, you know, we would meet in our clusters. I was always more than willing to share what we did because I'm a very collaborative leader, not only with my staff, but with other leaders. At least I like to think I am. I have a teacher on here, or a couple teachers, I think they might disagree with me, but you know, I really like to share what we were doing at St. Teresa with other teachers because in my mind, it's just weird. I always looked at the Archdiocese as a whole and all of our students, and it wasn't just St. Teresa students. And maybe that's why I ended up where I did, because I did always have that mindset. I was engaged in things like accreditation and being an external chair because I liked going out and, you know, helping other schools, and I mentored other principals, and I don't know, that just was always me. Of course, I think my staff members would say, she's never in the building because I'm always out with other schools or, you know, whatever. So that's just something to think about, trying to model that. And then social persuasion, just encouraging people. If you see that loner, encouraging them in any way that you can, you know, building them up, complimenting them, whatever you can do to try to get them on the right track. And then obviously, you have to recognize that all these physiological features kind of play a part in this too, you know, fear or stress. I mean, think about it. If you're really, really stressed about something, you're not going to have a lot of self-efficacy. Or, no, who was it? Kathleen, you were talking about you feel like you're in math, you do a great job, but you're not quite so sure about yourself. We were talking about dynamism with religion. It's kind of the same thing where you're probably more stressed in religion. Maybe you're fearful that you're going to do or say the wrong thing. And so, of course, that's going to reduce your self-efficacy, and then you might not be as dynamic as you want. So it's good to recognize those physiological factors and maybe what you can do to try to alleviate some of those if possible. And like you said, Kathleen, you know, other than, you know, like trying to get more knowledgeable about the content, like I said, maybe observing another religion teacher, anything you can do to try to build up that confidence. And again, this is just some more ideas of building collective efficacy, you know, trying to analyze data without pointing fingers. You got to remember, this is us, this is not you. So let's say you're a team and you have a math teacher and a language arts teacher, and let's say you're looking at the word problem or problem solving isn't so good. You're not pointing fingers at the math teacher saying, well, see, you're not a good teacher, look at that data. You know, obviously that cannot occur for collective teacher efficacy. But realizing we're a team and what can we do together to make these scores go up. Listening to the ideas of others, presuming positive intentions. How many times do we go in kind of with a fixed mindset of how a person's going to react or, you know, behave, and going in with positive intentions. Social sensitivity, being sensitive to the feelings of others. That relational trust, going back and forth, mutual respect. And just this idea that everybody's doing their part and we're all in it together, we're a team. There is, again, an instrument in this book that you can use that talks about collective teacher beliefs for a faculty. So that, that might be something, that'd be something really probably should come from the principal, but it's this idea of, and I'll just read a couple of the questions. How much can teachers in your school do to produce meaningful student learning? How much can your school do to get students to believe they can do well in schoolwork? How much can teachers in your school do to help students master complex content? How much can school personnel in your school do to control disruptive behavior? So you get this idea of, all of us, what kind of impact can we make as a team for all students? And so that would be kind of an interesting instrument to give to the staff to see where you are with collective teacher efficacy. You might find that you are really at the bottom and you got to start to build it up. Or you might find that you're doing pretty well with it and you just have to continue. I'm going to hold off on this, but you can think about efficacy. Okay, and this is pretty much the last section. So here's just some ideas to kind of put some of that collective efficacy into motion. So let's say you're creating this atmosphere, this environment where teachers are working together, they're collaborating, it's a we, not an I. So what are some of the things you can do? So here's just a few examples: learning walks, micro teaching, and assignment analysis. And I'm going to get into each one of these. So learning walks it's just your team, you decide that you're going to observe each other. Why are you going to do that? Well, you might want to hone in on specific things. Like you might want to hone in on how a particular group of students learn or how teachers teach. And that would be like some of these strategies. You might want to go in looking for questioning strategies that that your team uses. Classroom management, differentiated instruction, cooperative learning, wait time, this immediacy that we talked about earlier. We kind of did a learning walk when I was principal at my last school we were part of this initiative, and they came in and brought other people in, and we did a learning walk based on our teachers checking for understanding. So it's just whatever you decide on. Now that was a little different learning walk because that was outside people coming in that we had to do because of this initiative. But these learning walks that I'm talking about are more just you and your team. So let's say you're a second grade teacher and there's 2 other teachers on your team, and you decide that you want to do learning walks in each other's classes. And you decide you're going to focus on wait time. You want to see how much wait time teachers are giving, and does the wait time vary depending on if it's a struggling student versus a student that is excelling, so that sort of thing. And so you make an appointment, or you arrange the times and you go in and observe each other. Now granted, maybe you're doing this during a special time. I bet if you ask a principal would be willing to go in and watch your class while you do this. Most, I think, would. But so you do that, and then you come back together and you say, okay, maybe you collected some data while you were in there, and you come back and you look at the data. And again, no finger pointing, but this is what we saw. As a team, this is what we look like. And then you talk about, okay, well, what's the next step? How can we improve? And you come up with some strategies, and you go and implement them in the classroom. And then maybe you do another teacher walk and see if some of those strategies are being implemented. So I just think this is really cool. Like the idea of going in and, observing other teachers and learning from other teachers, to me, I would have been so excited about this. But I realize that there's some teachers that are hesitant to allow other people to come into their room. It might be a matter of self-confidence. It might be a matter of, you don't trust them. There's a whole lot of different reasons where you might be threatened by that, but I would encourage you to really, really try it, be open to it. The more you can learn, the better. And I would think that you would want to be the best teacher that you could be for your students. So just something to think about. And then a ghost walk, what they call ghost walk, that can be done when there's no students in the classroom. So maybe you're looking at the actual physical atmosphere and what's posted in the room. If you're threatened, maybe you start here. Like if you don't like the idea of someone being in your classroom when there's students there, maybe you start here and start to build that trust with your team. And then micro teaching, this is just where you capture a smaller part of your teaching. You could be videoing yourself. Again, it could be another peer coming in to observe you just for a shorter amount of time. Again, it's not evaluative, it's for coaching purposes, it's for making you a better teacher. And this just gives you an idea of what you could do. So you could plan a little lesson and then they come in and observe, or you could video it, you teach it, then you get some feedback about it, whether it's you self-reflecting or your team, and then you could replan and go reteach and get some feedback again. So just, there's so many different things you can do just to get the whole discussions going with your peers. And then hopefully you saw this in your slides when you received them via email, but there is these assignment analysis sheets that you can use. I have a math and a literacy, that's really all I could find. But you bring an assignment in, and as a team, you could open up this math assignment analysis, and as a team, you analyze that assignment. Now, granted, you have to be, I understand that you are being vulnerable there with your peers, but that's why this whole idea of teacher credibility is so important, building up that trust prior so that you feel comfortable sitting down and looking at this assignment and whether it, and then you can see how rigorous it is. So these particular analysis are weighing how rigorous an assignment would be. So if this is something your school's looking at, you might want to pass this on to your principal. Okay, so I promise we're heading home here. Does anybody want to share, have you had any experience with any of these collective teacher efficacy tools? The learning walks or the micro teaching, anything? Have you guys had any experience with that? What was it like?
Hi, I'm Katie. I teach at Baden as well. Hi, Carly. And a couple of years ago, we started PLCs for the first time. And one of the things that we were doing was really more of this kind of stuff, trying to build teacher efficacy and confidence and seeing what other teachers are doing. Because especially in high schools, you tend to be very isolated in your own little room all day. And so we did a lot of observation of other teachers, which actually started with everyone kind of writing down a couple of things they felt they did really well in their classroom. And we posted that in the teacher's lounge so that you could say, this teacher says they're really good at this thing, and I want to see how they do that. And so then you'd organize it with that teacher of like a good day to come in to observe whatever specific skill or strategy it was.
I love that.
It was great.
Wow. So did you find that most teachers took advantage of it?
We kind of required everyone to do it twice,
okay.
Or asked them nicely to, because it was a part of the PLCs. And so we talked about it within our small groups.
That's great.
Sharon, I was wondering if you can, is it appropriate, because I know our school is going to be starting to look at accreditation and strategies and things like that next year. Is it recognizable? Is it going to be acceptable? Like if we say that some of these are going to be strategies that the staff engages in over the next several years, is that okay to list those kind of things as part of your, or I know some are, what the students are going to be doing. I know that's the biggest thing, but I mean, to talk about that as a staff and say why you're going to do it.
Well, with accreditation, you have to use one of those 21st learning century goals.
Right. Can this be ways to get at it?
I was going to say, I don't see why this couldn't be strategies in your goal. Definitely. Like a learning walk in whatever your goal area is, I think would be a great tool. Awesome. Yes. So yeah, I love that idea. What about the rest of you? Have you ever had any experience with this? It doesn't seem like we have really. Let me ask you this. Are you open to it? Does this sound like something you would like, or would this be very intimidating for you?
I personally think it would be something I would like, but I think I also would be very nervous and possibly intimidated by someone else who is watching me. But I think it's something that we need to do ourselves to improve our teaching. So, I mean, there's good things we all do. There's bad things we all do. So if someone else can pick those out and help you, that would be great.
Well, and that's why Kathleen, I think would be key is to work with a teacher that you have built that trust with. Because then you're going to be nervous, obviously, because it's the first time you're doing something like this, but maybe not quite so nervous because you really do trust that person. And maybe you just start with, okay, we're only going to affirm the positives. This first time we do it, we're only affirming the positives. That's it. And so then you hear that, which is important. It's good for you to hear the positives because unfortunately you don't get to hear the positives enough. So maybe you just start there. And then once you're a little more comfortable, okay, well, maybe we'll try one constructive criticism, something like that. You can kind of gradually work into it. I want to read here what Carly says because this struck me here. So she said, I'm very blessed to work with a team of teachers who work together to be the most effective and influential educators for our students. I'm really hoping post-COVID that I get to know and work with teachers outside of my department. That would be great. And then Laura made a good point how she said kids also notice that teachers are working together. I mean, think about the impact that would have on a student is having another teacher come in that room. I think that's huge, and it does set the tone for the whole school. And you're right, Gina, Gina, I don't know, I might be pronouncing that wrong. You're right, there are gonna be people that are uncomfortable with it, and they might not be as open. And that's not for you to worry about. That's for the principal to worry about if the principal wants to mandate it or not. But you could start with somebody that you work with that you trust, and do a partner learning walk, just the two of you, go and observe each other.
The idea. We haven't done that. But as a music teacher with an education background, just an elementary education background, I was used as a sub a number of times this past year with our sub list being so low. And it was really cool because I actually did a couple of the newer teachers who I didn't know very well. And here I was thrust into their room for an entire day, learning their routines, learning how they teach and what they do, and the kids knowing what to do. And it was really cool to see the kids knew what to do. And you could see, I could see her strong points without her even being in the room because I could see what I needed and everything like that. So it was really kind of cool.
That's great. Any other comments? Okay. Okay, let's go in and I only have a couple slides left. So just some things to think about, you know, if you are going to kind of get together in these teams, and you probably know some of this already if you are working in PLCs, but obviously, you know, your teams have to have a common time to meet. You really should come up with some norms for your team, you know, like rules of engagement kind of thing. And then just kind of identify some of the common challenges that you have by using the data. It's really important to use the data as much as you can. And then, sorry, I gotta move my pictures here. And make sure that, you know, what you're working on, you know, it's agreeable to the team. It's something that will motivate the teachers to take action on. And then maybe before you actually get into observing each other, maybe you have to get some PD, you know, whether it be like webinars or reading a book or whatever the case may be. You might need to build up your knowledge or skills about something. And then, you know, they talk about you can, if you're going to do this collaborative planning, you know, start to implement those lessons, whatever you decided on. Visit each other's classrooms, and then bring it back afterwards and talk about what you witnessed. Again, hopefully you might have some sort of data collection tool. So it's not just, you know, real subjective. It's, you know, you can show the data, talk about the data, and then just kind of adjust as needed. And then I like this quote, this very last one down here. Again, I got to move this. Oars are in the water and they're rowing in the same direction. That's what we hope. We hope our oars are in the water and that we're rowing in the same direction. That's basically collective teacher efficacy. So to sum it all up, when a teacher increases credibility with students, student motivation rises. And when a teacher has evidence of their ability to impact student learning, and then they take that information and partner with other teachers to achieve even more, students learn more. So you know what? I just realized I did not have my contact information screen on this PowerPoint. So if you need me, my email address is swilmes, WILLMES, at CatholicCincinnati.org. My cell phone is 859-743-4173. I would love to hear about your successes. You know, if you try something, like if you're doing learning walks, I would love to hear about that. And just some of the things that our schools are engaging with, just so that I can take what you learn and share that with other schools. So I want to really thank you for attending. I feel like I did way too much talking today. So I apologize for that, but thank you for sharing, those of you that did. Thank you for listening. Thank you for, you know, being attentive. You will get your 0.3 free CEUs. You'll see that appear on your Educata Data Center. Last final reminder, make sure your name and your school that you're from are in the chat, and that's how we take attendance. So any final questions, comments? Okay, well, go and enjoy your Monday afternoon and the rest of your summer, because this is my last session. So thanks, everyone. Take care.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Have a wonderful summer.
You too.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.